No, we're radio kids.
Right.
I mean, we experienced television when we came home from the street corner, but we didn't hang on the television set after school the way the next generation did. We were radio kids, and then as fast as we could get out of the house, we were street corner guys.
Speaking of street corner, you hung around Morningside Heights.
Morningside Heights.
But you had a different name for it.
Well, they called it Morningside Heights Columbia University because of political reasons of their own. We lived in what we called White Harlem. It was the west side of Harlem. It was technically, in a manner of speaking, the white area of West Harlem. We had Cuban, Puerto Rican, a lot of Dominican, great number of Dominicans in Manhattan now, and Black Harlem, of course. So we lived in a kind of a mixed area, especially as you got out from the Irish enclave. We lived in a little, I would call it an Irish enclave, and as you went out from there, actually on LaSalle Street, at one time at LaSalle Street, one half of that street was white and the other half of it was black. And there wasn't a lot of hostility. I mean, there were occasional things, and there were attitudes probably that people held privately. I don't know. I didn't never have that in my household. I never had those words and those attitudes expressed. So I didn't have them. But I know I heard the kids around me. But there was never any open hostility, because when you live in the area between two very different areas, you have to learn to get along. It's a luxury to live in the middle of one of those areas and have all these attitudes and, you know, have a chip on your shoulder. But when you live right where the two of them join, you're forced to sort of live in a third area, which is the mixture. And it's very nice. It's very it's a good way to start your life.
You were kicked out of 3 high schools.
That's right.
Kicked out of choir, kicked out of summer camp.
Altar Boys, summer camp,
Altar Boys,
and Boy Scouts.
And
that's called... Yeah, that's
Air Force.
That's called the hat trick.
Now, what was the terminology the Air Force used?
The Air Force discharge. That was it was a general discharge under honorable conditions. It wasn't a BCD, a bad conduct, and it wasn't a dishonorable. So I got all my pay and allowances. But they let me out early because they were looking to cut manpower, and they looked in the areas of people who were being less productive than others. And I had stopped. I was in a very elite maintenance squadron. We had to have the highest IQs going into the Air Force of anyone to get into K systems. We ran and maintained the bomb navigation system. They were analog computers and radar systems and optics. We repaired them, and that was a very advanced system made by a lot of different. It was in the Boeing 747, which was the medium bomber. And I got out of the maintenance area. Once I got the job in the Air Force, they thought, well, that's pretty good. We got a guy. They were doing kind of public relations for the base. You know, this is good for the Air Force Base to have a guy who's being productive and not just knocking up local girls, you know. So I got out of my career field, as they call it, and because I was not productive in their minds, and so I could get out 11 months early. And I got out at 20, and at 20 I had my GI Bill of Rights, and I had 3 years experience in the field I wanted, and I had beat the game.
Very good.
Yes. It was a good start. It was a great start. It let me know that, man, you can make some breaks for yourself.
And the next stop was KXOL, and you met in Fort Worth.
I met Jack Burns in Boston on radio up there, but I wasn't suited for that station. It was a network station with soap operas and stuff, and I went up there because you always want to get to a bigger market. When you're in radio, the first thing you do is you start recording your voice. You start taping to make your tape. You start making your audition tape so you can get to a bigger market. There's more money, more exposures, you can move on. It's a farm system, you know? So I wanted to get to Boston. I thought, well, I'll go to that station. I had a friend who got me in there. The guy was in the sales department. And I figured, well, I can make a base there and I can look around Boston for a top 40 station to go to. But it never worked out. But I met Jack Burns there. We roomed together with a third guy, Ron, and hit it off very well comedically, and I lost that job. I got kicked out of there for taking the news unit, the mobile news unit, from Boston to New York on the weekend just to buy some grass. That was what I did. So, you know, once the twig is bent, you know, So grows the tree. And there I was.
Well, wait a minute. You didn't go there because the pot was so good in New York. You didn't know anybody in Boston, right?
I didn't know anybody in Boston, and I wanted to be with my buddies down in New York.
Right.
So we were 5 of us driving all through Harlem looking for grass because we knew where to go. 135th Street was the stop. We had certain stops we could make to buy grass, and we were driving around in this thing with, it says on the outside, it says WEZE, NBC News, and we're looking for grass, and we're all like guys, in our early 20s. So it was a lot of fun.
Now here we're into the '60s. I'm taking longer than I had planned because
That's okay.
there's so many things. You're into the '60s.
Mm-hmm.
You've been getting high since you were, what, 14?
Yeah, 13.
And you were going through, sorry.
These things are important.
That year does make a big difference.
That's right.
But here you are, you're 30 years old. The summer of love is going on, 67, 66. Everyone who's involved with that is generally about 20 years old.
Yeah.
And their parents are 40 years old.
In the nightclubs I was working.
And you're in the middle.
Yeah.
And you're playing to the parents, and you made a decision at that point that you were playing to the wrong audience, basically.
Yeah. Just a small backstory to that. Remember the Danny Kaye dream as a child? I wanted to be like Danny Kaye. So that was what I was pursuing in show business, and that's where I had come to that point on the road to. I found out in the interim on the way that I wasn't such a great actor, and I wasn't going to be in the movies. But I found out I was a pretty good writer of comedy, and that I could probably do that and figure that out for the rest of my days, and let that be my thing with some movies thrown in. So I got to that period, and I had dropped some mescaline and some acid, as had a lot of my friends, and I hung around with mostly malcontents like myself. All my life I had been, I got kicked out of all those things because I defied authority all the time. I wasn't in step. I was constantly out of step with this society and the authorities in it. And that was my B life. My A life was I'm going to be like Danny Kaye, which, if you think about it, is a mainstream path. That's something that you do. That's a people pleaser thing. You have to learn to please people and go on and get bigger and bigger audiences and become a famous movie star, and that's how you do it. But I had a B life that I didn't know about, that I didn't realize that this was bifurcated. I had a B life, which was fuck all these people, fuck all these people. I don't buy this shit. Now that person was being kind of like suppressed without my knowing it. I lived it out in my private life. I hung out with musicians, and their hair started to get long, and the music started to change in the 60s, and the music was protest, and I was hearing people who were using their artistic talent to further their ideas and their philosophies. Buffalo Springfield and the Beatles and Bob Dylan and Joan Baez and so forth. And I'm thinking, that's starting to dawn on me that I'm not using my ability to further these thoughts and ideas that I agree with. I have thoughts on that too, and I'm not doing that. I'm entertaining these businessmen and shit in these nightclubs doing people pleaser shit. So I something struck at that time, and it was probably the acid, And I realized that I was in the middle, that these people were in their 40s, I was entertaining the kids in their 20s, well, kids, not the people in their 20s, were embracing the anti-authority that I had lived. So I said, well, this is where my audience should be. And I didn't redo, I wrote a new act. I put in a lot of my thoughts and feelings, and it became autobiographical. That was the first thing that a writer does usually, is to write about himself, even if it's thinly disguised. Mine was open. I talked about being a Catholic, being a school kid, being a New Yorker, and the things that had affected me and that I enjoyed about school and those experiences.
Yeah, but during this awakening of yours, you fell victim, like a lot of us did, to when you're doing drugs and whatnot, it's not always conducive to productivity. And
yeah, sure. Well, once you get to something that you can't put down,
right?
The beer and the pot. My lifelong buzz was beer and pot. You can put that down. You can regulate that. You can say, okay, well, today I have to do this. I'll just have about 2 beers in the morning and smoke a half a joint, and then I'll do that, and then I'll get high. That's. But when you get to things like cocaine or any of the other ones we all know, and you get to the addictive drugs, it's a different story. And that's what happened in the early 70s once I had started my record career.
One of the fallout things that happened as a result was Carson. He sort of distanced himself from you when you're going through this change.
Well, when I went through these changes, my appearance, my hair got longer, my beard grew, and my clothing became closer to I guess you'd call it the hippie ideal, And now some people in show business, some old, the old-timer, not old-timers, but the old-school people, they thought that I was making a very crass decision to, as I heard it from one guy, to cash in on the hippie thing. That was their way of looking at this from the outside. They weren't attuned to the kind of, pot is a value-changing drug. It's a hallucinogen. It's a mild hallucinogen like acid, and it's a value changer. And if you smoke from the time you're 13 till the time you're 30, you have formed certain attitudes, and it just reinforced my malcontent, my outsidership, the feeling of being outside and not belonging. So these people had never had that, so they couldn't see that there might be some integrity in what was happening to me. And they thought, well, he's just trying to cash in. Don't worry about it. They'll see through him, and he'll.
You thought you were doing a Bobby Darin with this?
Right. Just going to the mountain and coming back, I am different. And it wasn't that. It took 2 years for this change to take place, physically, with the growth of the beard and the hair. And I did it on television. There were syndicated shows I was doing by that time. Virginia Graham had a 5-day-a-week show. Della Reese had a 5-day, and so did Steve Allen. And on these shows in this change period, I would explain what it was, that I don't belong in nightclubs. I belong on the colleges. I belong on the campuses. The beard would get longer, the hair would get longer, and by the time 2 years was up, I was there. But in the meantime, regular show business, which I cared very little about, but Johnny Carson was important. That was another platform that I wanted to show my kind of like new self. And they got afraid when they heard about it, because they thought, oh, he's on the acid, and they don't know what you're going to do. And I came in to see Johnny one time, and what happened was my wife had written a press kit that was very kind of telling about my new change, my new direction, what I wanted to do. And I was going to handle myself and just kind of be my own manager. And the press kit, I wrote a very funny thing about why I wanted to go to the colleges. I want to go to the colleges because you can steal lab equipment and stuff. And it was just a very bizarre letter. And I signed it with my left hand like a 2-year-old, And so they saw this at Carson, and they thought, this guy's fucking nuts, And they dropped me. I had already done probably 10 or 15 Johnny Carsons, maybe more than that. And they dropped me. And I was a year before they could see this other new self take hold, get some credibility by virtue of the fact that I was working in coffee houses and filling them. And then I did concerts and I filled them. And then they said, oh, okay. And they let me back on.
Yeah, but you made the mistake. Well, I shouldn't say it was a mistake. That's for you to decide. But you got all coked up and ran into Johnny's dressing room.
I asked to see Johnny in his office. Oh. I asked to come over because I wanted to present my case. But I was full of coke and I was real speedy, I was getting my teeth and probably my legs were going like this, and everything. I don't know. And I had a tie-dye shirt that was really garish and bizarre looking, And that just confirmed what they thought. They thought, oh, fucking Christ, look at this, So I had to fight my way out of that by being accepted in the place I said I would be, which was, younger, I'll call it a more youth-oriented culture,
Well, Johnny obviously knows talent, because you ended up coming back and hosting. You filled in as guest host. How many times?
I don't know. It must have been 20 times I guest host. I've done 140 of those shows, counting Jay Leno, starting with Jack Parr.
Did you enjoy co-hosting? Was that too straight for you?
No, it was. I enjoyed the status that it gave me, and the exposure to talk about whatever other things I wanted to talk about. But it wasn't coming. And I was loaded on coke on a lot of those shows that I co-host. I did one show when I was loaded, and David Carradine was one of the guests, all right? I believe he was on acid that night. I only just say I believe that. I've never asked him. He came out in one of these, he was in that kind of Far Eastern, that period.
Kung Fu thing.
Yeah,
right.
well, this was more like Far Eastern. It was kind of a diaphanous, sort of a flowing white garment, you know. And he came out, and he was sitting there on the couch with his legs in the crossed position up on the couch. And I could swear to this day that each time I asked him a question, that he was answering the next one. You know? Yeah. That's how fucked up I was. And you do have a list of the questions, so you kind of know what's next, because you do rehearse what you're going to ask. But I don't know how that would be possible, but it seemed like he was doing that. I must try. I wonder if there's anyone out in eBay land who has an old copy of that for some odd reason. I have a lot of old stuff.
Can you imagine Mr. and Mrs. America laying in bed watching?
Yeah.
And you guys are on. By the way, speaking of being coked up, the very first Saturday Night Live, you were the host.
Coked all week.
And did they have to bang on your door and get you to come to rehearsal?
They say they did. It's been said to me. I believe it, because you do get, you do lock all the good bolts and things and shit when you're getting real paranoid, you know. Yeah, I did. I had great coke too, and I did it all week, and I didn't like what I did on the show, and I was afraid to do sketches. I didn't want it. I told Lauren the first day, I said, "Don't put me in sketches. I'm not good at that." I really didn't feel very confident about acting ability, and I didn't know sketch acting is different from acting. So I didn't make that accommodation in my mind. So I just said, leave me out of everything, Just let me do little spots. Let me do little monologues, 30 seconds, a minute and a half, 2 minutes here, and all through the show. And that's what they did for me. They left me out of the sketches. But I can see myself grinding my teeth on that first broadcast. If you ever see the DVD, watch for the guy grinding his teeth and catching his breath, kind of like,
I believe you told me you had a collection of a videotape collection of you over the years, showing your hair, different lengths and whatnot.
I did. I must have lied. I think what I might have been referring to the fact that you can do that if a person wanted to, they could do that. The Great Recession.